Wow, my feet really are not the same size. Oh, hi, didn't see you there. Yes, I was wrong about wind deflection, but in an interesting way, I think. When I explained the wind system in ballistic.exe back in April, I said the following. A bullet that falls and a bullet that is fired both hit the ground at the same time, and that's true. But the one that is fired is much more influenced by wind, even though wind should push both bullets with the same force. I explained this by taking into account that as a bullet travels through the air, somewhat counterintuitively, it orients itself into the wind because of its aerodynamic shape. And this causes it to deflect because as it travels, one of its sides provokes more drag, hence deflecting the bullet. But since then, I've been bothered by this explanation for the main reason that following this logic, a spherical projectile would be much less affected by wind, although the drag coefficient is much higher, which means that it's much more affected by drag. Recently, I think I put together what I understood wrong, and it turns out my understanding was incorrect, but the system I coded into the game was actually right, correct by mistake, if you will. Well, let's forget for a second that the bullet orients itself into the wind at all. Now, this is its velocity vector. But let's take instead the velocity of the air around it. So it's basically the inverse of the bullet's velocity vector if the air is still. Now, if we introduce some wind, the velocity vector of the air moves like this, which means the air velocity vector is this vector now. But it doesn't depend at all on the bullet orienting itself to the wind. It's just the direction of the air. What I displayed in the previous video doesn't make sense because there isn't a second velocity that would cause any one side to drag more than the other. Now let's display the drag vector as well as the deflection that results from it. And watch what happens as speed increases, even though wind stays the same. And note that drag is exponential with speed, which means that the higher the speed, the higher the drag exponentially. Now observe, as speed increases, the deflection dramatically increases. But more aerodynamic projectiles have way less drag than spherical ones, and therefore reducing the drag dramatically reduces the wind deflection as well. Now let's back to a more aerodynamic bullet. Why does it matter that the bullet orients itself into the wind? Well, it really doesn't matter, except that it makes our lives much easier. That's because the drag coefficient changes with bullet orientation into the wind, of course. And that's because the surface exposed to the air changes. So when the bullet orients itself into the wind, it means that it keeps a constant ballistic coefficient. And we don't really need to take into account the bullet shape, only its coefficient from the forward angle. As it turns out, implementing my first understanding of wind deflection matches with this explanation exactly. So the code was correct all along. Since I was too focused with the interesting fact that bullets orient themselves to the wind, it kind of blinded me to the real mechanics that influence the ballistics here. In a way, this explanation is somewhat simpler. Well, I hope you found this interesting. Ballistic.exe is a weapon simulator with advanced ballistics and weapon manipulation. You can check it out in the description or watch some other videos on the channel. And don't forget to keep your toes out of the soup. See you later.